Hello, welcome to AHA 2010. I'm Seth Bilazarian, a private practitioner in cardiology from Massachusetts, here on a panel introducing a topic that's near and dear, I think, to many private practitioners in cardiology around our nation, and that topic is private practice cardiology in uncertain times. And with me are two other cardiologists in practice. With me is Melissa Walton-Shirley, a private practitioner in a two-person cardiology group in Kentucky, and Dr. David Skolnick, a private practice cardiologist in a large single-specialty cardiology group in Kansas City, Missouri, which is recently elected to become an employed physician group. And we're interested in their opinions about what the direction is in cardiology, what the advantages and disadvantages of private practice are, what are the decisions that might come up with a decision to become an employed practice group or an employed physician, and some other uncertainties in this time. And we're excited to hear about their opinion about what directions are going to go. And we have some good opinions and good experiences to share with. So I'd like to just start off by saying that we are in definitely uncertain times. Physicians here on the panel with me, but physicians that I practice with and talk with here at AHA, all share a similar belief that we really have a great profession, a great career, that the practice of cardiology is very exciting, it's intellectually stimulating, it's emotionally rewarding. We really love taking care of our patients, but the business side of cardiology is really where we have a lot of frustrations and concerns. We're not sure about the future, and that's what most of this topic is about. So today we're not going to really be debating the merits of single payer or the issues about whether healthcare reform as it's currently constituted is good, or whether the midterm elections might reverse that and that's good or bad. But all of those things really play into the decision or the discussion about this uncertainty. How do we plan to go forward, and what's a good strategy to go forward? So I'll basically say that we're in a pretty good situation right now, but looking forward, we have a lot of anxiety. The Archives of Internal Medicine recently said that cardiologists make $93.74 an hour and work about 60 hours a week. And I think that the pay is I'm not sure about the accuracy of the payment, but I'm sure the hours are underestimated according to my experience with my colleagues. So I'll turn it over to Melissa and ask her to give us some opinions about what you think are advantages of private practice. Why have you chosen to remain a private practice two-person cardiology group, and give us some sense about what you think about that.
Well, you know, my partner and I have been in practice collectively now for about 50 years. He was actually in Glasgow for 10 years before I was there. So we actually sat down one day and briefly discussed the possibility of becoming hospital employees, and we kept coming back to the point that we didn't really want to lose the sense of autonomy. We like to choose our own, even small things like office furniture and what type of equipment we're going to buy, and are we going to expand, and where we're going to place our own clinics, et cetera. So I think the most disconcerting portion of this entire discussion is you can't even bonus your own employees. You can't make out your own schedule. At least, you know, that's my perspective on it. And I had a very good friend recently, a pulmonologist, and I'll give you an example of what happened to her. She had a very uncomfortable situation where she became crossways with the administration. She brought her father over from another country, actually, to come see me in the office setting. And while we were there having a discussion, she got a phone call. And it was her clinic saying, you have to come back right now to clinic because we booked patients in this time slot. And she said, but I told you very clearly I can't do that. I'm here with my father, and we planned this for about 4 to 5 weeks. So she left my office in a rush, very uncomfortable, very unhappy about that situation. Before she knew it, she noticed that one of the techs was actually timing her with a stopwatch to make sure she spent X amount of minutes with each patient. I mean, those types of things are really disconcerting to someone in private practice. We don't want to lose control of our practice. So that's my concern. And that's probably over-exaggerated and overstated, but that's truly the way that we private practitioners feel about that issue.
So I think that you're echoing what many physicians have said to me about wanting the independence, the entrepreneurial spirit to deliver care in potentially maybe small, innovative ways that serve their patients, the smaller practice setting. But we know that from an ACC 2009 survey that more than 50% of private practice cardiology have become employed physicians. So although that is a desire perhaps for many physicians have chosen to become employed physicians. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Skolnick, who is in a large single specialty group of great renown in Kansas City with excellent care and involvement in research. who's decided to become, his group has decided to become employed physicians of the St. Luke's Health System. And maybe you could tell us what was the decision behind that. Maybe help us understand what made your group, seemingly well suited to not make that decision, chose to go ahead.
Maybe just one clarification on the survey you quoted from 2010. It looks like the larger groups, cardiology groups of 10 physicians or more, are more likely to integrate or enter discussions with their hospital partners. And groups that are more of the solo, single, small 2, 3 cardiology groups are more likely to stay independent, at least from the survey. I think we've had the good fortune of having a very close, fairly symbiotic relationship with our hospital partner that actually goes back to the late 90s, where we've had initially a management agreement where we were able to demonstrate that by turning over the managerial control of the cardiovascular service line of St. Luke's Hospital, their flagship, the Mid-America Heart Institute, and their attempt to grow within the market force. So they have a healthcare system throughout the metropolitan area of Kansas City. We have slowly been able to demonstrate improvement in care and be able to offer subspecialty care, not just at the Heart Institute, but throughout the metropolitan area, and to bring more cardiovascular services to areas in the outlying areas of Kansas City. Last year, we had a professional services arrangement with the hospital where basically we leased our inpatient services to the hospital. It was, I think, another example to show where there is a lot of synergy and common ground where if we work together, we meaning our practice, we meaning the hospital, all three parties can benefit, and the third party is the patient. So just to kind of give you a little example, as regional distribution became more challenging for us, part of that was driven by inefficiencies of being able to offer angioplasty throughout the city, of offering PET imaging, and we developed a citywide PET program. With the falling reimbursement, the financial model for us became more challenging, and so with the professional services arrangement, we leased our inpatient services to the hospital. We told the hospital that we would champion things like coding and documentation and length of stay, which was very important for the hospital. We told them we would work on really perfection as best we could on quality markers like ACE inhibitors and beta blockers, which ultimately benefit the patient. And in a world of transparency, this would become very important to the hospital. And then we would be able to derive a fair market value for our services for the hospital, which helped us as an independent private practice. That seemed to be a very solid model for us up until middle of last year when a lot of economic forces were changing. Obamacare was coming, falling reimbursement for echo and for SPECT imaging, and the looming 21% of reduction in Medicare. We even got a letter from our bank 15 years saying that we read what's in the paper and that healthcare is changing and that you are no longer a low-risk business venture. And it became very apparent to us that we were not going to do well in the old model. And I think it's just simple to say that times are changing, and we are changing with the times. I wouldn't see it as good or bad, but for us, we again see that there's a lot of common ground by working with the hospital. The hospital's interested in quality initiatives. There's likely payments going to be focused more on quality and a little less on quantity. And unless you're really, really on the same page, I think it's hard to kind of drive that program as kind of, a simple start. I think we will be more nimble with the hospital as we kind of struggle with changes in reimbursement and patient care. And I think on the same page, we'll do a better job.
Well, one of the things that you said that was interesting to me is that many of the positive things you described, I think, really focus on two areas, and that's really inpatient care and imaging. One of the things that Melissa seemed to imply, and I would think that many of us are concerned, is with regard to really the outpatient practice of cardiovascular medicine. And maybe you could share with us what role they've had in terms of actually managing the delivery of care in the outpatient setting for those patients who come to your office to see you.
Sure. So, the integration process is complicated. It took us almost a year to negotiate the understanding about how we want to integrate with the hospital. There are lots of moving parts, there are many competing interests, and there are lots of details to sort out. Probably of the articles written about integration, and we could certainly support this idea, probably the single most important thing is governance. The governance of how you are going to interact with your hospital is probably the crucial point of negotiation with the hospital. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and one of the things that we were very successful at doing, was to try and have as much overlap and as much integration in the governance structure. The hospital, I don't think, really wants to get involved in the micromanagement of how we take care of patients, of how we run our practice. Now, we've had the benefit of a 10-year history of mutual trust, mutual respect, of an equally strong partner as an independent private practice and a fairly strong hospital entity. And so I don't think that one had a huge leverage over the other, and we had other projects where we saw there was common ground to work on. So to kind of answer the question, I would say that we've benefited from mutual respect, mutual understanding, trust, which is huge, and we have a governance structure that we think is fair and balanced, that gives us as much control as we can have in the integrated model where we're under the umbrella of the hospital system.
I think that issue is really important too when you talk about trust, because it's kind of like a marriage. If you have a good marriage, it's wonderful. The sun's shining every day, the birds are singing, and everything's lovely. But if you have a bad marriage between the CEO and a group, then it gets to be really difficult. And so I think if you are not someone that trusts that your CEO understands the direction that medicine is taking and actually has your patient's best interest at heart, it gets to be a very uncomfortable situation. And, some of my friends, unfortunately, the pulmonologist I was talking to you about that I'm acquainted with is now employed in another state in another hospital, and called me back a couple of weeks ago and said, it's wonderful. Everything is different. I have total support of the administration, and she loves what she's doing. So I'm happy that it worked out for her. And she's now hospital employed, but at another hospital.
Okay. Well, I think that makes perfect sense, of course. If you're in a bad employment arrangement, it's going to be bad. And if you're in a better one in which there's respect and support, that would be a good situation. Let me ask both of you a question that I think weighs on private practice owners like myself and like Melissa's situation, and that's the issue of managing uncertainty. And let me ask, as you in a smaller group, I'm in a larger multi-specialty group. My group is about the size of David's, but it's multi-specialty. We have a 23.6% Medicare cut on December 1st that's expected, and then another 6.5% on January 1st. Now, I guess I would ask both you and a smaller group of only 2 physicians, but I'd also love to hear David's input. Does the position of being, for David's question would be, as part of a 40-person group in a large healthcare system, do you not worry about that? Or is there still some concern about that uncertainty? I'm guessing, Melissa, you please speak for yourself, but that is a very anxiety-provoking for a smaller practice.
You and I talked a little bit on the phone about this. This sort of reminds me of what happened to the farming communities all over America. There were price supports placed for farmers. And to give you an example, let's say that corn per bushel was $4.86 per bushel, and the government promised that the farmer would get that much. And so the farmer went out and amassed all the workforce he could. He bought new tractors. He built barns. He had more employees. And then all of a sudden, the price support fell to $1.89 per bushel. And then the next thing you saw was Willie Nelson doing farm support because of all of the crashing that occurred with regard to the financial status of those farmers. And now I think that's kind of what we see looming large in private practice, is that we're going to lose 1/3 of our income, whereas we had spent all this money building buildings and hiring employees. We have inflation with regard to healthcare costs, etc. So I think that's really a concerning issue. And the way that my partner and I have decided to approach that issue is, and it's probably not very business smart, we just need to do the best we can to take good care of the patient, to see every patient that needs us, and leave it at that. Now, that's not very business savvy, but it actually is in keeping with why I went into the practice of cardiology to begin with. I'm hoping that my dad's philosophy when I went into medicine was just smile, try to be helpful, try to be reliable, and work hard, and everything will work out. Now, we'll see if that model is going to stand up or not. I know that in the past week, if there's anything that's going to project for my future, what my future is going to be based on the number of patients I saw a month's worth of patients in a week last week, it seemed. So we have a lot of patients in the area. We have a depressed economy, but we have a lot of work to do. And I'm hoping that the sheer numbers and volume will be what will carry us through this hard economic time.
Okay.
We'll see.
David, I'm interested in your input about does just the general concern about these issues, do you feel completely immune from that, or in that you're now part of the system that will basically manage that uncertainty for you?
So we are certainly affected like everyone else is affected. We're affected as the hospital does well, we will do well. As the hospital doesn't do well, we won't do well. And the hospital is certainly facing its own challenges of falling reimbursement, of more indigent care, underinsured patients. So we are here to try and embrace the struggles that the hospital is going to have. I think the way we see the future is the probably four things to think about how to make a hospital system vibrant and strong. And I think maybe not necessarily in this order, but champion patient satisfaction is probably going to become a more important aspect of delivering healthcare, which may not have been as high on the radar as it has been in the past. For value-based purchasing, about a third of that reimbursement may be linked to patient satisfaction. Quality initiatives will certainly play out because we are anticipating that there will be a differential payment for those who do very, very well on quality markers versus those who don't. Having said that, meeting that bar of perfect compliance or door-to-balloon time is going to set the bar very, very high. I think integration is going to help by bringing lots of physicians on the same page, and I'll give you just an example. You can imagine that readmission rates in the future conceivably not be paid as well as they have been in the past. If you are independent and not linked to the hospital, you don't necessarily have as much vested interest in whether patients get readmitted, except you would say that you may not have done as well a job as you could, but certainly some patients get readmitted for no fault of your own. But we, as a team, if you will, perhaps have need to work harder on trying to identify and prevent readmission. That's probably a subject that will gain a lot of traction over the next couple of years. And probably the last thing to talk about how we will survive in this model is to try and ensure that we offer value in the sense of good care at reasonable cost. So certainly in many hospital systems there are probably inefficiencies and there are probably waste through no one person's fault, but through a system we're here to look at how can we do things more efficiently from a cost standpoint, keeping patient satisfaction and quality initiatives high.
So I guess I would ask, though, you described the situation where you have a good relationship and currently confidence in the management team. How might that change in the future should things not go well? How might that happen, say, the hospital makes well-meaning capital investments that go awry and the hospital struggles financially because of, although anticipated good decision-making sometimes in the best of circumstances don't work out. If the hospital system doesn't work well, but your group continues to perform well, but the system at large is doing poorly, how might that complicate the tension between you and the larger health system?
So in the integration, I talked about probably one of the cornerstones of having a successful model, I think, is governance. The other is the structure or the model in which you engage in a hospital relationship. And we have created our own. So we joined a hospital that's a non-for-profit 501c3 corporation, and we have entered into that model. And so the cardiology group is basically its own entity working under the umbrella of the parent healthcare system. So in that regard, we have a fair amount of control over the cardiovascular service line and the profitability of the cardiology products and services that we offer to our patients and at the hospital. So, certainly we will be at risk if society pays cardiology differently. And in that model, we will struggle to understand how to be more efficient. And if there are incentives for more efficient use or quality markers, then we're here to kind of redirect and change our practice to kind of meet those goals.
Okay.
I mean, I think the bottom line is that it's a very evolving process, and we're going to just have to evolve. And the way we practiced in the 80s and the 90s, it's just not going to work anymore. I mean, if, for example, fee-for-service goes away, as you probably know, in one of the ACC cardiology magazines, there was a little picture on the front page saying, "Is fee-for-service dead?" Right? So if you, just for the point of discussion, if that concept is true, in a couple of years it plays out that we will be reimbursed in a different model, then you're going to have to substantially change your approach of how you deliver care. I mean, if we're going to be paid for episodic care or acute care episodes or bundling care, we're going to have to adjust to that model. And I think being on the same page with the hospital, we can be as nimble as possible. And I would say on the other side of the coin, I think a fairly progressive, forward-thinking CEO would want to make sure that their cardiology group or their cardiologists are secure, vibrant, and not feeling threatened so that they can work with the hospital. I think in the end, the hospital has the same goals that we have.
Well, let me counter what you just said with a certain uncertainty, and that's some models, for instance, such as accountability care organizations or medical homes might become more primary care based, which of course may have certain advantages for the community at large or payers, but could certainly put you at odds with the hospital if that is the direction it goes, where specialists are considered, sort of second-tier players, and the reimbursement, for instance, may run through primary care and become more like what happened in the days of capitation for primary care. So that as part of that larger organization, it seems that you may be in somewhat at risk because you now have bought into the larger system.
I think if you take a step back and say, when we take care of patients with heart failure, first of all, I should say there's probably no shortage of heart disease, right? I mean, the epidemic of heart disease and heart failure and coronary disease is only on the rise, right? And as the population ages and we have better therapies to offer them, whether it's interventional therapies, device therapies, medical therapies, I don't think there's going to be a shortage of cardiology patients. But to say that maybe some patients could be treated well or well enough with a primary care physician and that we might serve more as a consultative capacity for those patients, again, we are in the position of growing the cardiology workforce because we're still in control of that. So if we look down the road and we see we may not need more cardiologists, then it behooves us not to recruit more cardiologists and to grow. If the model is that we're going to have to be more of a consultative-based practice, but it still brings value to the hospital, then they will still value the services that we offer them, right? So, for example, if they need us for the complicated heart failure patient, then we offer service to those patients into our hospital system. I don't think it belittles the value that we bring to them. If a primary care physician can take care of things that are less complicated, in fact, you could argue it would be better in the triage approach to say, if someone can manage lipids, hypertension, heart failure well, that's great. And when things get more complicated, they would move to us.
But I don't think there's anything much more complicated than a patient with congestive heart failure, really and truly. And those old studies have shown that if cardiologists care for patients with an acute myocardial infarction, their mortality is actually lower. So I hate to see in our model, in our locale, we are seeing, for instance, they introduced hospitalists for the first time into our mix. And I was actually asked about that, and I told them we have some elderly physicians that need help, some that are ill, and the hospitalists actually have a place. But what I see now when I walk through the hall, I remember one weekend in the olden days where I did 19 consults myself in 36 hours. They were very sick patients. The ICU was full. Now I'm seeing those patients are discharged, some of them with heart rates of 120 and atrial fibrillation. So guess what? Their length of stay was really short, but their 30-day readmit was really high. So even though they will deny that, I've actually participated in taking care of those patients in the last few months. And by and large, they're doing an excellent job. But if I were able to direct that patient's care, that patient would have stayed in the hospital longer and stayed out of the hospital longer once discharged. So there's a very uncomfortable shift in the way things are doing. And, back in the day, in our hospital setting, it's a 150-bed hospital about. We carried a census of 120. There were 2 cardiologists caring for the patients there. Now we have the hospital has purchased all manner of family practitioners. They're purchasing real estate. They're purchasing buildings. They're going out into these other communities. And my concern is that we're going to be so top-heavy with physician salaries that in about 5 years we're going to be broke because reimbursement will be even lower. And now we'll have all these physicians at our hospital that have to be supported and a census of 41 patients like there was a couple of weeks ago. I think that's going to be very tough. And there has to be a balance between being widely metastatic as a hospital in a community, or you're going to live comfortably with private practitioners.
Okay. Well, I think that those are great points. Both of you have made points from different viewpoints, and it really is the tension that we're facing. And half of cardiology groups approximately have chosen David's way, and half have remained the Melissa way. I liked the analogy of having the Willie Nelson farm aide, who will be the contemporary artist who sings for Dr. Aid in the future.
Sure.
So we have a variety of stresses that are on us. We haven't talked about other stresses like the burden of adoption of EMR that's coming down pretty heavily and pretty fast, but with both carrot and sticks. There's going to be reduction in reimbursement for those who don't adopt EMR. There's a step up, according to many reports, of the efforts to crack down on fraud, which of course we would embrace as doctors and as taxpayers. We want to see a crackdown on fraud, but we think that there may be significant burdens for our management of our practices on facing up to the Federal Recovery Audit Contractor Program, or RAC program. There's, in our state, a small example I'll highlight is our hospitals are required in our state to have interpreter services available for all patients who don't have English as a first language. A wonderful and excellent thing as a clinician, that we want to be able to communicate with all of our patients in the language of their choice and their comfort. But of course, that comes at a financial burden, and many people anticipate that our state will require that for practices. So we have a lot of these things that seem to be coming at a faster pace than happened in the past, at least in my experience, 17 years in practice. It seems like the burdens of how we document, how we bill, how we code. We have ICD-10 coming now. And how we pursue reimbursement has changed faster now in the last several years than they have in the past, and seem like it's going to change even at a greater speed in the next coming years. I guess I'll ask for a final opinion. Do you see David is of the opinion that we're likely to see most practices move in the direction of becoming part of an integrated system, employed physicians in some arrangement. Do you share that opinion, or do you think that this is likely? You implied that this is the way it will be, as using the farmer analogy. Do you think that that's likely going to happen with all cardiologists?
I think it's like, we weren't going to mention politics, but it's kind of like the political arena. You know, one year we get mad at a certain administration and we elect all Republicans, and the next 4-year cycle we elect all Democrats, and we keep bouncing back like a ping pong ball from one wide swing to the other. And I think that's what's going to happen here. I think right now we're going to go way too far in the direction of hospital-based practices. And then I think we're going to realize in a few years that there are going to be some things that are not going to work out about that, and then we're going to go running back to the private practice realm. What I hope to see is a balance. I hope at some point in our locale that we can have a comfortable arrangement like you have, where we have someone that we have a lot of faith in with not a lot of tension, that everyone can work comfortably for the good of the patient. You know, in this conversation, I think it's very important to make sure that we make sure that our well-being is taken care of. But in all of this, what I really want to happen from the bottom of my heart is that the patient remain the center and the patient remain the focus. And I think if we do that and we do a good job, I really think that the rest of us will be okay. That's the way I approach it.
All right. David, do you have a last word on what you can advise those of us who haven't yet made the step of becoming employed physicians?
From our perspective, it seemed obvious that was a reasonable next step, and it may not be fair to extrapolate our experience to other cardiology groups. I know that we have a relatively unique arrangement both within our group historically and the relationship we've had with the hospital. I would say one of the advantages that we've had was that there was a lot of trust and experience well over a 10-year process, where we slowly had agreements and contracts, if you will, that brought us closer and closer, and where we could see the value of common goals and overlaps, of which the patient was the ultimate beneficiary, I think, of all the initiatives that we did. In fact, I think if you keep the patient concern, the patient focus in the forefront, the patients continue to benefit in our model. And I think the way the government reimbursement is working, public reporting and transparency, I think that we will need to be all on the same page to really kind of work on making sure the patient gets the best care. There was a analogy from the ACC presidential address in March of 2009, comparing cardiology to the airline industry. And just to kind of tell a little story, you know, in the 50s, every pilot had their own way of preparing an airplane for takeoff and landing until they realized that a protocol really guaranteed the landing gear was down every time. And we basically come to kind of adopt that idea that you want the landing gear down not 99% of the time, but 100% for every patient every time. And I think if you work together and you have protocols and systems in place, you can really guarantee that everyone's getting the therapy they need and that you can offer the best care to the patient.
Great. Well, thank you both, David and Melissa, for a conversation on uncertain times in cardiology practice, and thank you for really great perspectives, about as far apart perspectives in terms of the business of medicine, but both committed to excellent care for patients, which what hopefully unites all of us. So I hope this is the beginning of a great conversation here on theheart.org for cardiology practitioners on uncertain times, and thank you for paying attention. Good night.